Hello all. I hope we're all awake for the first of the afternoon sessions. First of all, thank you to Mark, Mehdi and the team. We're delighted to be here. I am Luke, co-founder of Hitch. We're actually a British early stage company with most of our engineering in Barcelona, Spain. What we focus on is actually building platforms. Building a platform. Do I have some background music going on?
It's actually out there.
Okay. Someone's tuning up. Okay. Hitch focuses on helping organizations build platforms. A platform means taking an API and actually building a community, an engaged community around that API to build a true platform. What we focus on is the API economy. So we're going to give you a little taste of what is the API economy briefly. What is Hitch? Very, very briefly, but what I actually want to share with you today is Hitch works with many hundreds of APIs across the world, building API communities, and I want to share with you some of the insights we have around these organizations, assessing risk, understanding risk, and the opportunities within their API supply chain. So here's some of the real basics. I just want to ensure we're all on the same page at the start. You guys will all know this already. I just want to touch on these. There's millions of APIs out there in the world. Public and private, we all hear about the public ones, most are private. You will know that in the financial services sector, most are private. The delivery of itself of an API is a bit of a commodity these days. There's not the same cost, the same effort around that. You don't have to be brilliant to get an API out there. And finally, developers are much more influential in the API procurement process. This may seem trivial to most of you, but these are becoming the decision makers of all the procurement going forward. And this is going to shape the way the API economy moves. So who's winning? You'll know some of the brands here. We want to see what are the patterns around these brands. Okay? These are brands that have taken an API, successful businesses, but they've built very engaged developer communities. An engaged developer community doesn't mean a developer comes along and does something with them once. It means they raise awareness amongst the right people. They engage them in a process of showing them value in the short term, get them engaged on their platform, and have a continuous relationship. By doing that on a repetitive pattern means you build a true platform. So what is platform? Platform is moving from an API to having visibility of your API, to getting these people on board, growing your API community, and continuously engaging them in that process. At Hitch, here's some of the brands we've worked with. We primarily work with big tech brands. We also work with some financial services brands as well. And as I said, we always focus on patterns of taking an API, taking it to a relevant community. Now, a big thing everyone assumes is we help people grow public communities. We do help with that, but the biggest thing is private communities. Many of you in this room would have already invested millions upon millions of rolling out APIs internal of your organization, and you struggle to get engagement of actually having your organization take those APIs on board, fully utilize, and create the value your organization desired from the start. That is what we focus on, and that is what I want to share a bit of insight around today. So patterns, as I said, patterns in technology is what we work with, but also in financial services. The organizations we've focused on in the past, in financial services, have always had two core problems. And I actually call it the same two halves of one problem, and that is community engagement only. Many of you are experts in building expert infrastructure, rolling that out, but actually engaging a community and enabling them to take value from that process is a completely new world for you all. It might be slightly offensive for a few of you, but tough shit. But that's the process we're on. We're trying to help organizations actually understand platform is not infrastructure. Platform is a community that engages with you day to day in a long-term relationship. And this is the point we've seen. We've spoken to a number of banks, both in Europe and the US, and they come to us and say, we've just spent 20, 30, $40 million on this infrastructure. We have a team to support this, but we have no developers. How do you actually get to that next step? So, taking a step back briefly, let's agree that I'm going to give you my version of the API supply chain. You may say, bullshit, that's great. This is my version. This is the simplified version of hundreds of thousands of conversations we've had with many organizations across the globe around what is the API supply chain. And there's three basic components. There's many variations of these. On your, let's do it the right way, your right, There's third-party APIs you consume. So these are third-party APIs that are approved by your procurement department that you're able to use day to day. There's certain organizations that provide these services. There's different teams in your organization that utilize those. But these are approved for utilization going forward. There's the internal APIs that you have produced. So these are separate teams within your organization building an API. There may be many different platforms. You may be using Apigee. You may be using many other suppliers here today. Normally you have a massive mix of providers to basically reflect the catalog of APIs you use internally. Now, very few of you will be able to give me right now a snapshot of every single API that you depend on internally. But this is a core component. The final piece is the APIs you push out. So I was speaking to Capital One before. They're doing work in the US and in Europe of rolling out APIs to third parties. RBS are on that journey. Many of the banks here are all on that journey. This is the third part, and this is about managing an external community. So all of these three pieces are the way we've seen that everyone brings together at a high level the different components of their API supply chain, okay? What am I listening to? What am I building and listening to? And what am I pushing out? And all of these provide different value at different steps in the process. So you've got a few different risks here. So one of the biggest fuck-ups ever was Twitter, when they completely changed their policy around their API usage for their community. This destroyed an enormous amount of value of their brand, and the dependence of many organizations that built businesses on top of their API completely moved elsewhere. So there's a reputational risk on how you manage your public APIs. It's also ecosystem risk. You need to really clearly understand this is a distinct community that enables you to scale your business in ways you've never seen before. So it's not just putting an API in front of them, it's been thinking forward and having a strategy of how you engage these people, even when problems occur. So this is one part of the risk you have by having third-party APIs in your supply chain. So third-party APIs you're pushing out, which are from you. The classic one, which we all know, internal APIs, we've had different systems in place for many years. The way your infrastructure is set up now, your architecture has shifted. So you've got more stakeholders internally who have more liberty to make change, which may impact the system that you're looking after, but you need to be aware of at all times. So the change here is not the fact that there's different systems interacting, it's the nature of the way they're built and the way they change in that process. So this is the central part, and this is actually the most important part from our side of Hitch. This is where we're helping businesses the most. This is where they really like to work with us, and this is where we see a big problem because you've already invested in this infrastructure, you need help to get the most value. And finally, there's the third-party APIs. So there's massive changes happening. Your organizations are starting to open up and actually accept more third-party organizations to be usable APIs. As you have more APIs coming into your systems, you have much more risk of change occurring. As you move away from the old banking style of IT infrastructure to a more IT-orientated, classic modern, sorry, not classic modern, that's a stupid term, basically moving towards the organizations we work with, like the Facebooks, like the Atlassians, that move much more quickly, you will have greater risk on basically seeing these third-party APIs change at a much quicker rhythm than you're used to. So what this all comes to is complexity. The architecture of what you're building is being simplified. We're getting much more simple ways of interacting. But the complexity of the organizations and the nature of change that's taking place amongst all these APIs is increasing. So we've got this API-driven architectural approach. We've got more third-party services coming into our organization. We have also, on top of that, a movement towards microservices and a movement also towards SaaS. So I know that isn't as big in the banking sector, but it is a massive movement elsewhere. And that's a change in business models. And the impact is the change in business relationships. And this is what I'm trying to get to, of your risk is not just technical, it's the business relationships of the technology services you're consuming and providing are fundamentally changing. I was at a big SaaS event last week in Dublin, and the whole event was about, number one, we've got the SaaS business model, you log into a product, that's great. All the investors are saying the next phase is API-driven SaaS. API-driven SaaS is the future, and it's what all the investors across Europe are looking at right now. This change, the nature of the relationships that you have with organizations that interact with your systems, is going to massively disrupt the way your business operates. But for you, it means there's more complexity amongst the systems that all come together to basically service the products that you provide day to day. So, commercial relationships are changing. The technology is getting simpler. The commercial relationships are changing. There's a larger volume of commercial relationships you need to manage. The biggest change at the end of the day is it's becoming much more transactional. You used to work with an API. I subscribe to Twilio. You send all my SMS messages with Twilio. I subscribed for that for 3 years. That's not going to matter anymore. What we're moving towards is, as I said, a lot of SaaS-based API-driven relationships, but it's going to move from having a 3-year relationship to a 3-millisecond relationship. We're going to start procuring SMS, and I'll say I want to send 1 million SMS in the next 3 seconds, and I want that relationship to last 3 seconds. And that'll be it. So you have to manage the interaction with the supplier for 3 seconds, and that's the entirety of your relationship, and you have system dependencies within that. So this movement is exciting. The interesting thing about this is coming all the way back to the banking industry of you guys are a transactional organizational setup. And the whole of the IT economy is moving back towards that nature of short-term relationships that will be purely transactional and have enormous complexity behind that. So, how can you try and manage this? More complexity of relationships. The architecture is becoming simpler. Many suppliers here can help you with that. But that complexity of relationships, how do you control that? How can you make a decision today if you cannot control what's going on? Number one is visibility. What is my current stack? What is my current API stack? Where's my catalog of every single service that I have a dependency on today? Myself as an organization, can I give a report to the CTO saying, here's every third-party service we use right now? That's a fundamental. What's all the internal services and what's the interplay between each of those internal APIs that we have in play? And third, what are the dependencies that other systems have on what we're producing every day? Do we know how many developers, how many third parties are actually using us every day to make their business operate? You need to have basic visibility across that. That's step one. Step two is control. You have to have continuous delivery of information around this. If you are not able to say, here's the report today and this is how it's changed for the next day, it is a useless system. You've got to have a continuous process of assessing what is your API supply chain. And only from there can you start making informed decisions. You're going to start making decisions of changing suppliers in your API supply chain day to day, minute to minute, and as I said, second to second. So, what is the dependency? You need to basically be able to, in the coming year or so, understand any dependency that you have. Okay. What system depends on any other services we have in play? What supplier depends on us? And if we change this, if I change this endpoint on this one API, what's my risk of basically pulling down a system of an organization that depends on us? What developers, people, not just systems, what people are depending on our API supply chain that we pull into their systems? What products are and what third parties are we dependent on? If procurement comes along and says, okay, I want to change this service to this service, you need to say immediately, these are our dependencies on this individual service we have in play right now. So, what we've seen at Hitch is there's a number of different ways of approaching this process. Some organizations have very large continuous auditing teams, continuously going across the IT organization and working with procurement to understand what are the services being utilized at this point in time. It's expensive. There are central automated tools. Some of the suppliers here provide elements of that. This is a massive growing area of actually having a central automated tool that can track all the components of your API supply chain. And the biggest thing I've seen, we speak to many organizations where they have 10, 20, 30 people who are purely sitting down all day, every day, reviewing API documentation, speaking to all the different organizations involved. These are the 3 best practices. We think there's a lot more to come in this. What we wanted to do today was just share some of the exposure we're seeing of organizations. So we see basically right now, the API supply chain is becoming a massive opportunity. There's many more stakeholders involved. The infrastructure side is simpler. Getting an API out to market is more cost effective these days. But we see the risks can be easily controlled as long as you have a coherent strategy in place of continuously reviewing what is in play in your organization. So thank you. My name is Luke. I'm co-founder of Hitch. Happy to have a chat out here if you want to talk about this in any more detail. Thanks for your time. We're doing questions briefly?
That was great. Yeah, we've got a few questions.
I answered them all.
Yeah. Anyone? Oh, yeah, we've got one down the back.
Hi, my name's Adiza. I used to run ecosystem development here at Level 39. But I think that I wanted to ask you how quickly you think the financial services industry will actually move with what you're talking about with APIs. As last year at Cybos, I presented about the API economy. I had loads of blank faces. So where do you think the financial services industry is when it comes to actually taking this super, super seriously and investing a lot of money into it to take it to the next level?
I previously worked in financial services a few years back in RBS and a few other organizations here. I think they are taking it seriously and massively investing, as can be represented by the people here today. I think that's taking place already. Actually, these organizations get into the stage where they have comfort to articulating these stories externally is the big challenge right now. I think most people in this room are probably fighting internal battles of how to get these projects prioritized and have the appropriate resources going forward. And where an organization is willing to actually open this up and make it public is the challenge right now. So I think they already are. It's coming soon. Many of the discussions today are pushing that through. I wish it was a bit quicker. I'd love to be working with a few more organizations who are progressing more publicly around this. But I think it's there already. It's just a matter of time of these internal battles being sought out, is my thought.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Samir. I'm from Pocket. I'm from a company called Pocket. We are a challenger bank. I think the challenge here is with the world of APIs is lack of standards when it comes to formats or authentication or authorization, and particularly in PSD2. What are your thoughts on that? Is that going to go away?
No, we need to go deeper on standards. Everything around standards is going to better facilitate the entire industry. With Hitch, what we focus on a lot of the time is we help about engaging developers. So we're working very hard on supporting the community, like the Open API Documentation Standard, which is formerly Swagger, otherwise known as Swagger. We are heavily supporting those areas because there's many organizations wishing to make progress, but the most common question we get at Hitch is, how do I make the first steps? So the more we all work together on these standards, the better we'll be able to facilitate the progress of the whole API industry as a whole, and specifically in financial services. So we wish there was a hell of a lot more standards. It would allow me to lower the costs and accelerate my business a lot more quickly if there were more standards in place. I think it helps everyone out there in the market, but selfishly it would help my business as well. So I think we all need to double down and work together on a range of these standards in documentation, PSD2, et cetera, to make sure everything is cost effective on how you can make those first steps. We've got to enable people to see some value very, very quickly. And without getting that initial value, it's going to be very tough to get many more organizations involved.